Hey, I want to say a Latin phrase to you. Si vis pacem parabellum. Now, some people here will know exactly what that means, and a lot of you are thinking, I'd have no idea what that means, and that's okay. Si vis pacem parabellum. So we're going to keep going with this series in Matthew 18. Matthew 18, we've been talking about friction, and we opened it up the first week, and we talked about how Jesus here is talking to his disciples about friction, and he says there's different kinds of friction, and there's different approaches to each kind of friction. And so we had to break this down week by week by week. You know, week 1, we talked about our friction with the world. As redeemed people that God has saved, we know that we're out of the broken system of the world, yet we still have to interact with it. So we have some friction there. And then with that, the people of the world exist in that system. They're victims of that system. They're bought in on that system. And so we have friction with them too, and we have to approach that friction how? With love and with compassion. Recognizing that the world is trying to rob us of the image of God within us. The most important thing about every one of us is that we're made in the image of God. So the world wants to come in and undermine that and take that away from us. The image of God is your agency, your ability to choose God and or reject him. And the image of God is your eternality. The moment you were conceived, your existence began and it will go on forever. If you use your agency to choose God, then your eternality is with him in heaven. If you use your agency to reject God, your eternality is without him in hell. So we talked about the world and the friction that we have with this broken, dark system and with the people who are bought in on it. We talked about how the world is pursuing us to rob us of the image of God. But then the next week, and that was a tough message, right? But then the next week, last week, we got to talk about how God pursues us and how that's not scary. It's not Zeus with a lightning bolt. It's not God looking to find us so he can snuff us out. It's God looking to find us so he can pick us up like the lost sheep that we are and carry us back in and celebrate when he finds us. We talked about how God, he looks for us. He looked for us. He pursued us through creation. He pursued us through redemption. He pursued us knowing he wasn't going to find all of us. He pursued us knowing what it would cost him, and he pursued us all because he wants eternity with us. So we talked about man versus God week 2. And now, as the person in the room with the most punchable face, it's dangerous for us to use this. But we're talking about man versus man today. Man versus man. Conflict, tension, friction. It happens, right? It happens with us. None of us are perfect. We're going to have this. So before he was betrayed and crucified, Jesus took his disciples, the 12 of them, to the upstairs of this building. We call this the upper room discourse. And he tells them, hey, listen, I've got to tell you some really important stuff. I've got to get this out to you. And so he brings out all of these teachings and stuff like that, but he starts the evening off like this. He washes their feet. Pretty gross, but he washes their feet. And he says, I need to give you a new commandment. And this is what it is. Love each other the way I love you. So he sets the bar so high. Now, why did Jesus wait until the end of his earthly ministry to give this commandment? Well, it's simple. They needed to see everything that Jesus had done for them before they understood how much he loved them. And they needed this in the front of their minds when he goes to the cross for them, so that they could understand the gravity of loving someone the way Jesus loves them. So he says, love me, love each other the way that I've loved you. And then he says this, and guess what? This is how the world will know that you're my followers. If you don't love each other the way that I love you, then the world's going to have no idea that you're my followers. But if you do, then they'll know. And so our love for each other becomes the measurement of our willingness to follow Jesus. That should mean something to us. That should put loving each other the way Christ has loved us, sacrificially, painfully, right at the front of our minds when we think about how to live together in church. But the problem is, it doesn't always stay there. And when it doesn't, when we lose sight of that love, that Christ-like love, when we lose sight of that, we get to experience something incredibly unique and terrible. Church hurt. There's nothing like church hurt. It is the worst. It's the worst. Church hurt is the worst. So Jesus says, hey guys, I need you to love each other the way that I've loved you. And Peter says, you know what, Jesus? I'm going to love you like you've never been loved. I'm never going to leave your side. I'm your boy. I'm here the whole time. I got you. And Jesus is like, yeah, but by the time the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you'll have denied me 3 times. Jesus gets sold out by a guy that he poured into for 3 years. Judas Iscariot sells Jesus' life for a bag of silver. Church hurt. Peter denies him 3 times. Church hurt. The disciples disappear when Jesus is being beaten and crucified. Church hurt. See, church hurt is unique and it's terrible and it's awful, but guess what? There's some hope here because before you went through church hurt, Jesus went through church hurt. He did it first. Just like everything else with our faith, Jesus did it first. Jesus suffered betrayal. Jesus suffered abandonment. Jesus suffered rejection before you ever had to. But church hurt is real, and it's hard, and it hurts. There is nothing quite like church hurt. Why is it so bad? I mean, we get hurt everywhere, right? But it's because we come here looking for comfort and for shelter. And when we don't find comfort and shelter, and instead we find affliction and persecution, it hurts more. The expectation is that we'll love each other the way that Jesus loved us. And when that's not met, it hurts more. The church was given to us for a purpose. And man, when it's not firing on all cylinders, it hurts. But Jesus is so gracious and so good. He gives us a system to figure it out. He gives us a system to process our friction with each other, to heal from our church hurt. He gives us a system. And he gives us a perfect system. It's perfect. He gives us the perfect system to work out our friction with each other. But the problem is this. If you take an architect, right? If you take an architect and he lays out the perfect blueprint, right? Every angle is exact. Every measurement is so precise. And then you go out and you buy all the discount wonky parts and you put together your building. It's going to be a little bit messed up. Jesus gives a perfect system and he fills it with imperfect parts. Hallelujah, because I need to be in this system pretty bad. So he fills it with imperfect parts, and so it ends up a little bit wonky. You know? Have you ever lived in a house? So we're from New England, where every house is like 100 million years old. And, you know, the doorways look like this. You know? You ever been in a house like that where you're like, well, the door can shut 3/4 of the way. That's good enough. That's kind of what it is. Human imperfection is the source of human friction. Think of sandpaper. You take 2 pieces of sandpaper, rub them together, and then show them. You can see that they're scratched up, a little bit damaged. You can see the evidence of friction there, right? We are all sandpaper. Okay? And all the grains and all the grit and all the sand is our imperfections. And none of our imperfections are the same as everyone else's. Varying degrees, different areas. We all suffer different imperfections. And so when we come together in this system and we rub together, guess what? There's going to be friction. See, we're imperfect, right? We're imperfect. But we're called to a higher standard. See, that's the thing. Christians are imperfect, but we're called to a higher standard. Love each other like I've loved you. There's a high standard there. Even in our imperfection, there's a high standard there. It is not enough to say, well, I'm not perfect. No. Jesus didn't say, hey, love each other as I've loved you, as long as, you can manage it. No, there's a high standard. And so we recognize, look, human imperfection is the source of human friction, and we're all imperfect, but there's still this high standard. But many of us are sold on Civis Possum Parabellum. And no, I still haven't said what it means, so you didn't miss anything. If you're like, I didn't think I fell asleep very long. I thought it was maybe like 10 seconds. I haven't said what it means yet. We need to look at this system. Now, here's the thing. This sermon is super easy to preach. So easy. I mean, Jesus literally, you're going to see this in the passage, Matthew 18, you're going to see it in the passage. He gives a step-by-step. Okay, do this, and then do this, and then do this. He gives the step-by-step for this process. It's easy to preach the message. It's easy to tell you the steps. It's hard to convince you that they're worth doing. Because being a Christian is hard. Becoming a Christian is easy. Jesus, I can't save myself. I can't settle the friction that I have with you. Only you can do that. I put my faith in you. Carry me the rest of the way. But being a Christian is hard because we put some things down that we want to hold on to. Sin is fun. That's why we do it. But as a Christian, we put that aside. Sin is easy. That's why we do it. But as a Christian, we put that aside. We pick up some hard things. We pick up humility. We pick up grace. We pick up forgiveness. We pick up some hard things to carry and move forward. So it's easy for me to tell you the steps that Jesus has. It's hard for me to convince you to do them. Then, there's another hard piece here. Unpacking why. Why in the world did we go through this process? Because when you first read this passage, you may think, okay, so these are the steps for kicking someone out of church. And then you think of that person you can't stand, and you're like, I'm going to get Eric out of here, and all I have to do is follow step 1, 2, 3. We'll get him out of here. No, the heart here is so important. Just like everything else, Jesus says the heart is so important. So, 15 minutes into this message, let's go ahead and open the Bible. Matthew 18. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. We are not good at that. If the other person listens and confesses it, we are not good at that. You have won the person back, but if you are unsuccessful, take 1 or 2 others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then, if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. I tell you the truth, whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. I also tell you this, if 2 of you agree here on earth concerning anything you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together as my followers, I am there among them. So again, Christ gives us this system to work out our friction. It's gracious that he gives us this. Think about it. You're God. You come here to build your church, and you recognize enough that it's going to be full of wonky parts that you put together a system to figure it out. That's grace. Grace has to be at the center of this whole thing. But what's the purpose of this system that he's given us? Well, it's this: to protect the church from conflict. Remember, we said that tension, that relational something's wrong, is not the same as conflict, and they're not the same as friction. Friction is how we live out our tension and figure things out between us. The purpose of friction should be peace. And so Christ gives us this system for the purpose of protecting the church from conflict. And he gives it to us step by step by step. And at first, when you read it, you're like, okay, 3 steps, cool. If someone sins against me, I go call him out. If that doesn't work, then I'll bring the squad. And if that doesn't work, then I'll blow them up in front of the church. And then if they don't like that, they're out. Sweet. There's no grace in that. You're missing the whole point. You're missing the whole point. Step 1. Fix your own heart. Are you seeking peace or are you seeking retribution? Are you seeking peace or are you trying to settle the score? Are you seeking peace or are you seeking separation? See, separation and peace aren't the same thing. You know that person that you can't stand from your childhood that you cut out, or from earlier in your life you just cut ties with them because you can't stand them, you don't want to even do anything with them, just they're out, they're gone. You do not have peace with that person, you have separation with that person. Our church should not be full of separate parts. We're a body that works together as a whole. So separation's not the goal, peace is the goal. Fix your own heart first. That's where Jesus always starts, isn't it? Your heart. Jesus doesn't say, okay, you need to get out there and you need to fix everyone else. Start with your heart. That's where Jesus is. Start with your heart. So step 1, fix your own heart and decide that this whole process is aimed towards peace, not towards being right, not towards separation, not towards winning an argument, but peace. We worship the Prince of Peace. We know the peacemakers are blessed. We read the Bible where it says, live at peace with one another. The purpose is peace. So step 2, step 2. This is where listen, I love Kansas. I'm an implant from New England. I love Kansas. I'm very happy in Kansas. I need to be really clear about that. I feel badly that we have some first-time visitors here and they're going to think that I hate Kansas. I don't hate Kansas. I love Kansas. But Kansas, we got to work on step 2. We got to work on step 2, guys. Where we're from, we got to work on step 1, so don't feel too bad. Love and respect the offender enough to go to them one-on-one, in person, and in private. Now, one-on-one, go to them. Guys, he does not say, shoot him a text and tell him that you're mad, right? He doesn't say, hop on Facebook Messenger and send him a message that says that you're mad. Pa-ching! Oh, cool, we're going to have peace now. No, he gives us a process. Go to the person. Go to them because you love them and you respect them. They're part of your church. You love them. You respect them. Seek peace with them. Go to them one-on-one. And instead of, hey, you sinned against me. You know what you did. We're going to talk about it. What if we actually take Jesus up on his promise to be there with us and we say, hey, something you did really hurt me. I want to pray for you. And then can we talk about it? One of those sounds like peace, and one of them sounds like retribution. One of those you want to be at peace, one of those you want to be right. It's not the same thing. So there's a really interesting concept in family psychology. It's called emotional triangles. And they happen. Emotional triangles happen. It's not a prescription. This isn't what we should be shooting for, but they happen. I couldn't explain emotional triangles with just my words. So fortunately for all of you, you get to see another one of my awesome doodle graphic things. Get excited. It's going to be great. It's probably going to be mediocre or less, but it's going to be great. And pay attention to what happens so we all can relate to emotional triangles. You'll see. But not many of us can relate to true peace, which would be a spiritual triangle. So I'm excited for you to see this video, and I will be right back. We're going to watch that video right now. As we continue with our study of Matthew 18, and especially talking about the friction between Christians, it's important to talk about a concept from family psychology called emotional triangles, and talk about how they compare to peace. So let's say you have two friends. We'll call the first one Chip, and the second one Eric. And these two amazing friends, Chip and Eric, go out once a week for pizza. After a while, Chip realizes that he always pays. Like, seriously, Eric can't even pretend like he's going to pay. He doesn't even reach for his wallet. This must be the cheapest guy on the planet. As you can see, this is causing a lot of relational friction for Chip. But the thing is, he's a nice guy and he doesn't want to say anything. Well, at least not anything to Eric. Instead, Chip brings it to an unrelated third party, one that has a relationship with Eric too. He does this to minimize the friction between Eric and him. So let's just call this third person Free Pizza Mike. Well, Chip tells Mike all about the friction between himself and Eric. He talks about Eric to Mike. And yes, this minimizes the friction between Chip and Eric, but that friction isn't really gone. Instead, what Chip has told Mike is now causing friction in Mike's relationship with Eric. Now, Mike thinks that Eric is a cheapskate. Meanwhile, the more Chip and Mike talk about Eric, the stronger their relationship becomes. And when two people share this kind of bond, they're identified as enmeshed. Now, there is friction in two different relationships and an unhealthy bond in a third. This is called the emotional triangle, and it's a very dangerous relationship model. Okay, let's start over and see what happens when we follow the biblical model of Matthew 18. We have the same two amazing friends, Chip and Eric. They still enjoy pizza, and Eric is still cheap. And the same friction exists for Chip because of Eric's cheapness. In this scenario, though, Chip will bring in a seemingly unrelated third party that also has a relationship with Eric. But instead of another human being, Chip takes his friction to Jesus. This has the same minimizing effect on the friction between Chip and Eric as before. But something interesting happens here. The more Chip talks about Eric to Jesus, the stronger Chip's relationship with Jesus becomes. Now they're enmeshed, just like Chip and Mike were in the first scenario. But Jesus, through Matthew 18, tells Chip to talk to Eric, not just about Eric. Chip, wanting to settle the friction, goes to Eric.
In that moment, through Chip's prayer for Eric, which is talking to Jesus about him, and his obedience to the process Jesus gives for handling friction, Jesus and Eric become enmeshed too. Jesus starts to work in Eric's heart and brings Matthew 18 to mind, saying, listen and confess. So Eric hears Chip out. He listens to Chip's grievance and confesses his selfishness in never offering to pay. Through this act of listening and confessing, Chip and Eric become enmeshed too. Unlike the emotional triangle that ends with 3 unhealthy relationships, this model, let's call it a spiritual triangle, ends with 3 healthy relationships. And instead of spiritual triangle, you could call this by another name, peace. And this is a very practical example of Jesus' promise that peacemakers will be blessed. Thank you for watching.
So, you see, we have this tendency to create these broken relationships under the guise of wanting peace. Oh, well, I didn't want to go right to Eric about how cheap he is. By the way, thanks for the pizza, man, every week. It's so great. So generous. If many of you don't know, I'm going to step out of the sermon just for a second. Hannah hates it when I do this, but just for a second. Chip's favorite pizza is pepperoni and black olives, and if you rewatch that video online later, you'll see that it's pepperoni and black olives. So, guys, a lot of times we bring in this third person because we feel like going to the person who's harmed us is going to cause more problems. There's a fundamental lack of trust in God at that point because Jesus has given us this process. If you love and respect a person, you'll bring it to them, and you'll invite Jesus into the process. And that's how you settle your friction. That's how you heal and prevent church hurt. That's how the system works. Jesus built the church. He can tell you how to maintain it. But the unfortunate thing is it doesn't always work. Imperfect parts in a perfect system. Sometimes you go to that person and you say, hey, what you did really hurt me, and I need to pray with you about it. I want peace with you. And they say, hey, I don't care at all what you're saying to me right now. Go away. Or they say, what you're saying didn't happen. Or they say, that's not sin. Or they say, that's your fault. And the friction doesn't get settled, right? And then the tendency could be to fall into conflict. But you keep that because Jesus gave us a system. He gave us a system. And it's not si vis pacem para bellum. Do you know what that means? Probably some of you do. It means if you want peace, prepare for war. That's not the Christian model. If you want peace, prepare for war. That is not the Christian model. That's how it works in the world. I get that. Nations can't have peace with each other. That's why we have endless war. Si vis pacem para bellum is not the biblical model for us. It's not how it works in the church. Instead, si vis pacem para Christus. If you want peace, prepare for Jesus. Bring him in. Don't go at this thing looking for war. Don't go at this thing thinking it's a fight that you have to win. This is not the same as church conflict and church tension and church friction. We don't kick down doors. We don't abuse people because we've been hurt by them. No, we bring Jesus in. We seek peace, but it doesn't always work. So what do? Well, like I said, easy message because Jesus tells us the next step. He says, listen, if that doesn't work, bring in some witnesses. Now let's talk about these witnesses because like I said, this is not you grabbing the squad and rolling up on someone and being like, well, you sinned, so now we're going to talk about it. No, these witnesses, this is a really important part. Picking witnesses that are spiritually deep. Picking witnesses that are trustworthy. Because you choose these witnesses based on the idea of protecting the system, protecting the accuser, protecting the accused person. You got to pick the right witnesses. It's not about blowing a person up. It's about peace. If you want peace, pick the right witnesses, people that can be trusted not to take this out into everybody else. The whole point is containing and finding peace. Find the right witnesses that aren't just going to affirm your side of things. You want objective people that can look at it with wisdom and aren't just going to pick your side. These witnesses are so important because this is the way it's going to pan out. The accuser is going to say, listen, I have friction with another person. Will you come and talk to them with me? Just watch. Just be part of the situation. Be part of the scenario because I want peace with them. And then the witness will come and they'll listen. And they'll watch the interaction. That's what Jesus says, so that all of your words can be heard. And then those witnesses are going to say, hey, accused, you're wrong. You're in the wrong. You sinned. But all you got to do is confess that, humble yourself, apologize, make peace, and we could forget all of this. One of my favorite things to say, I love this. When someone apologizes to me, I love being, listen, this was a lifelong struggle, so don't think that I'm like St. Eric up here. I love being able to look at someone and say, I forgive you, never bring it up again. I love that. Man, so that's what the call is in this scenario. You bring their sin and you say, hey, this is it. And then the witnesses confirm, yeah, listen, you're in the wrong. We got to fix this. But guess what? As soon as you say you're sorry, it can be done. You ask for forgiveness, it can be done. But that doesn't always work. And so Christ in his graciousness, he gives us another step. He says, hey, yeah, bring minimal witnesses. Protect the system, protect the accuser, protect the accused. Bring in minimal witnesses, but that won't always work. So the next step is bring it to the church. What the heck does that look like? You know, imagine being the first time in a church. You're trying out a new church. You're like, oh, let's see what's up. And they're like, hey, we're going to bring up 2 people that have been fighting for 6 years. We're going to adjudicate. It's like one of these deals, you know? Let's hope that's not it. And I'll be spending a lot more weeks up here, I think. What's it look like? Well, I didn't ask for permission to say this before I came up here, so if you don't see me again, it was really great working here. I really appreciate all of you. We're governed, this church is governed by elders that are elected. Elders that are elected based on their character, on their dedication to the church, and on their dedication to Jesus Christ. They're elected. They represent our church. They represent the church body and its interests and its dedication to Christ. And so if you've worked through the steps for the purpose of peace, you've gone one-on-one, in person, in private, and said, hey, we're here. I want to have peace with you. I want to pray for you. I want to find peace with you. And it doesn't work. And then you bring 2 or 3 reliable witnesses, good people, not the squad. You're bringing reliable witnesses in, and it doesn't work, and both parties can't agree on what's going on. It doesn't work. Then you can go and you can shoot an email to the elders and say, I need to get this on the agenda. We got to talk about this because we're hurting, and I can't find peace with this person, and we've tried all these steps, and we're trying, and we want to get there. I guarantee, I know our elders, all of them. I guarantee they would meet with you. It's their job to protect the peace of the church. It's their job. It's the job they signed up for. It's the job that they were elected for, and it's the job that they were anointed for. It is their job, and I guarantee they'll do it. And it can be done in a room with less than 10 people to protect the peace of the church. Again, such an easy message to give, a pretty hard one to take me up on, right? Who wants to send an email to the elders and say, hey, so I've been fighting with this person for like 6 months, can't figure it out? A person who wants peace can do that and work through all the other steps first. But that doesn't always work. And so there's the nuclear option. Jesus says, if they still, accuser, accused, whoever's in the wrong, whatever, if we can't put this thing to peace, you have to find the source of the conflict and remove it from the church. The nuclear option, the one we don't want. We want to avoid this. This process is not for the sake of getting rid of someone. It's for the sake of peace. But if there's a person that just won't have peace, if there's a person that just can't embrace the Prince of Peace and settle things and listen and confess, or on the other side, if you're wrongly accusing someone, drop it. If you can't get to that point, it's time to bring in separation. And Jesus uses some strong words here. What does he say? Treat them like a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. And the Pharisee in us, all of us, is saying, oh yeah, bye-bye. See you later, pagan. See you later, tax collector. And we forget we're not Pharisees. We're followers of Jesus. Who wrote this? This book was written by a tax collector that Jesus had embraced and brought in. And so we want to pharisaically shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in these people's faces and say, sorry, you couldn't cut it in our church. You didn't want peace bad enough. You couldn't just say you're sorry, so now you're out. See you later. Not good enough. And we shut the door to the kingdom of heaven. And we forget that Jesus said, when you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in someone's face, Pharisee, you're on the wrong side of it. And you're not coming in either. And we forget that. We kick people out. We say, you're not good enough. But what did Jesus do with pagans and tax collectors? He opened his arms and he said, you can come to me anytime, but expect some things to change. Come as you are, not stay as you are. And so when we look at this in light of friction, the way that Jesus is calling us to look at it, he says, treat them like a pagan or corrupt tax collector. And the Pharisee in us is like, yes, they're gone. But the Christian in us, nope. The Christian in us says, you can come back any time, but be prepared to change. And guess what? If they come back and they say, you know what, years later, and this has happened in my life, I've had people hunt me down and apologize to me for things. Years later, you know, it's always been kind of off with me. I'm really sorry about everything that happened. And I've also had to have that conversation. When you grow up in a small town, maybe some of you know this, but don't necessarily know this part, and then you leave for a long time and then come back, you got to say a lot of apologies. I called it the Eric Mosher apology tour when we moved back to Massachusetts after the Army. It was like I'd see people from high school and I'm like, hey, just so you know, I'm sorry that I was such a jerk in high school. Okay, see ya. Next person, and down the line. But if that person comes back to our church and says, listen, I recognize how wrong I was. God's really been working on my life. Do you know what you get to say? I forgive you, and never bring it up again. Oh, God pursues us, and now we pursue peace. Oh, I love that. It's amazing. We get that. That's us. You don't get that at work. You don't get fired for wrongful behavior and then come back and be like, I'm sorry. And they're like, hey, it's okay. Never bring it up again. Come on in. You don't get that anywhere else. Oh, it's amazing. So it doesn't end there, right? Oh, this is the uh-oh. So a person comes to you and says, you know, I've got a grievance with you, and you say, okay, I'm sorry, I want to be better. Good, done. No, not done. There's a process. There's a process. I guess before I talk about that process, I want to talk about the promise behind the process. See, because we love this promise. Jesus says, where two or more of you, or two or three of you are gathered in my name, I'm there in your presence. I'm there, and I'll do anything that you want. And we love this promise for healing. And we love this promise for financial burdens. And we love this promise for praying over our children or our church or our community. We love this promise. We love this promise until we remember that Jesus is talking specifically about talking to each other, about our friction. Whoops. We don't want this. We don't want that one. Because when we invite Jesus into our friction, suddenly we're accountable because everything we're doing is done directly in front of Jesus. So we don't want that one. Hard pass. Jesus, I'll handle the friction. You just handle the healing and the blessings and those things. I'll take care of the friction. We don't want Jesus watching our friction because we choose to handle it so wrong. And we get the outcomes that we choose. We do. But that's the promise behind the process. Guys, when you invite Jesus into this process, it's going to be peaceful. You're going to find peace. You're going to find peace. Whatever you ask for, God the Father is going to do it. That's the promise. It's amazing. So here's the thing. I'm kind of leaving you open-ended this week. There's a lot of people in the room. You all have to come back or else you won't know how it ends. You can read the rest, I guess. Yeah, you can pick up the book. It's a good idea. So here's the thing. You go to a person. You say, you've sinned against me. It hurt me. I'd like to pray for you and then talk about it. They hear you out. And they say, oh my goodness, yeah, I could see that that's sinful. I'm really sorry. You have one of two choices at that point. And you know what? This is where Sivis Pacem Parabellum comes in. If you want peace, prepare for war, because that war is not between you and that other person. That war is within yourself. Suddenly, you have to decide, do I want retribution or do I want peace? And honest people will acknowledge that that exists. As gracious as you can be, honest people will acknowledge that that friction exists within ourselves. This sermon and next week, we're going to be man versus man part 1 and man versus man part 2, because I'm bad at naming things. But instead, they're man versus man, and then man versus himself. The last friction in Matthew 18 that we have to overcome is the friction within ourselves. Can we forgive? Can we let go? Can we say to a person, I forgive you, never bring it up again when it hurts? That's the friction, that's the war. If you want peace, prepare for war. Prepare for the war within yourself, and that's what Jesus is calling us to. He's going to close out next week. He's going to close out Matthew chapter 18, saying it's time to forgive people. In light of the fact that the world pursues you to destroy you, in light of the fact that God pursues you to save you, in light of the fact that you have to pursue each other for peace, now you've got to defeat yourself, because you're going to want to hold on to grudges. If you're anything like me, you're going to want to hold on to grudges. If you don't hear next week's sermon, this one's not finished. The process is not over. Even the disciples have questions about this process. You've got to hear it. I don't have a solid way to end this today because it's just not done. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for you guys. Because right now, there's a person in your life that you need to talk to. And right now, some of you are like, man, I'm going to need I got to brace myself because I know I have some incoming conversations because I've done some things wrong. There's some people in your life you need to talk to. Have the love and respect to go to them the way Jesus said, because here's the deal. This is the process Jesus gave. Red letters, can't deny it. If you follow the process, you can keep the moral high ground, meaning that you can keep yourself above. But the moment you break this process is when you're sinning. That's got to matter. Following this process is just obedience, and not following this process is disobedience. The end. That's it. Next week, we're going to finish out talking about what it means to forgive. So please come back for that. Right now, I'm going to pray for you because this is a struggle, and all of us are in it. So let me pray for you right now. God, we love you so much. You have sought us out. You've rescued us. You've done everything for us, and yet we're so quick. Your word says that we worship you, but we curse each other. We're so quick to backbite, to hold grudges, to look for retribution and revenge over the idea of peace. God, you call us to peace. Right now, I pray for every person in this room who has someone in their life that they need to go to directly in person, seeking peace. God, don't let separation be enough. Don't let segregation be enough. But instead, God, help us to lean into each other. Help us to live to that high standard of loving each other the way that you have loved us. That's what you call us to, nothing less than that. You give us a specific and gracious system, a perfect system made of imperfect parts to figure out our friction. God, in this church, we have our fair share of friction. Every church does. We're imperfect. I pray, Lord, that we would learn to use this system, that we would lean into this system, that we would learn to just follow you as you guide us through this system. Make this a healthy church full of strong connections. Settle our friction and mesh us with one another and build these relationships out strong. And God, help us to forgive. It's such an elusive thing. It's such a hard thing to get our hands around, but God, help us to forgive. Give us humility. Give us grace. Help us to understand how much we've been forgiven. Help us to always remember that you've pursued us. And Lord, as we continue to worship, I pray that you would bring those people to our minds, convict us. Help us to follow this process that you've called us to. for it to be healthy. Thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for the forgiveness you've given us. Thank you for inserting yourself into our friction to help settle it and help us find peace. We love you, God. Bless us now as we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.